Welcome everyone to another episode of Tales of the LGBTQ+. My name is Douglas Parsons. I am honored to have today's guests with me today, Liz Massiah and Michael Phair. You know Liz Massiah from a recently released episode of this podcast. She is a highly respected registered psychologist and clinical social worker who was involved in many of the movements that brought our community to where we are today. In her previous episode, Liz discussed the early formation of what is now known as HIV Edmonton, GALA, and the Police Liaison Commissions, an icon. My other guest, Michael Phair, is a trailblazer, another icon of our community, and a politician. He served on the Edmonton City Council from 1992 until 2007. He was the first openly gay elected politician in the province of Alberta, as well as one of the earliest openly gay elected officials anywhere in Canada. In 2015, the Edmonton Public School Board honored Michael by naming a school after him, citing his work with HIV Edmonton, Edmonton Homeward Trust, and so much more. Today on Tales of the LGBTQ+, Liz Massiah and Michael Phair join me to talk about how they know each other from the past, impressions, the various committees they've been on, plus so much more. Sit back and enjoy. The stories are going to be fantastic. Before I bring Liz and Michael to your screens and to your ears, I do want to make mention that Tales of the LGBTQ+ is a weekly video and audio podcast that showcases the remarkable people within our LGBTQ+ community. By listening to our stories, your stories, we gain insight, understanding, and connection. So let's continue to be connected with each other by meeting new and fantastic people. This episode was recorded live, so do expect technical hiccups, snafus, and other different types of hijinks. It's very likely that something has happened and most likely will. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts as well as Spotify, do make comments, do give us ratings as this helps us with algorithms. And if you're watching on YouTube, take a moment right now to press on subscribe as that helps us in so many different ways. Again, it's getting your stories out there. And perhaps you'll be a guest on this episode in the future. Liz, Michael, and I all reside in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. And it's important for me to say that I would like to acknowledge that I am on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional meeting ground, gathering place, and traveling route to the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and Nakota Sioux. I acknowledge all the many First Nation, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked this land for centuries. I also want to acknowledge the knowledge keepers and elders who are still with us and those who came before. I'm opening to myself to continue to learn and understand, and I hope you join me on this journey as we learn the truth. Without further ado, it is time now to bring to your screens and to your listening ears the iconic Liz Massiah and also iconic Michael Phair. Welcome both of you to Tales of the LGBTQ+.
Thanks.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Liz, I keep saying icon to you. Are you going to believe it one day?
Well, I've been getting a lot of positive feedback lately from very surprising places about which also confirms my belief that often what we do, that has positive influence, we don't realize it at the time. We're just doing whatever it is we're doing. And then somebody comes along and says, I heard you, or I saw you, or this, that, or the other thing. And it encouraged me, or it made me think, or it made me think differently. And so if that's part of what being an icon is, I guess that's fine. And I've also had experience of the other side of being iconic or a trailblazer, which is, being thoroughly condemned and criticized. So I guess the label fits in some ways, and I'm sure that Michael, you would say the same thing for yourself.
Yeah, I think very much, Liz, as you've said, at the time, we were just busy doing things and trying to move forward and this and that, and without much thought about what this meant in the long run, as opposed to at the time it seemed to be significant. And certainly, yes, there were plenty of naysayers or people who didn't like us and thought that we belonged in the lower regions of rather than the heavens, kind of thing. Kind of that too. So I think and I think that's a significant part of probably who both of us are, is that we were involved in day-to-day kind of stuff for years.
Mm-hmm.
Little by little, with lots of other people and groups and organizations trying to make some changes, things to happen. But it was rare that anything happened quickly overnight, kind of thing. That these were tended to be long-term kinds of efforts. And that,
I think the quickly overnight stuff was when people got mad at us and gave us a hard time, either personally or often publicly in the media. But I think, Michael, that you're right. I think that we were very busy just doing what needed to be done now, and hoping like mad and believing firmly that over the long term something would change. And so it did. And I think we both know very well that it's all the little bits of stuff that add up all of a sudden to a change.
Right. And a lot of it was in the context of what was possible in those days. I mean, I think back to the fact, Liz, that both you and I were heavily involved in trying to change the Individual Rights Protection Act, which was the provincial legislation that said that discrimination wasn't allowed, but it did not include gays and lesbians in it, kind of thing in that. And so our focus was to try to get that legislation changed so it would include gays and lesbians. And part of the legislation created a human rights commission to deal with cases, came forward, and also do education stuff and all that kind of thing. So much of our initial work was aimed at that commission, so that they would recommend to the provincial government, because they responded to the minister and the government with recommendations, or a variety of things that they might be asked to do by the government as well.
It was Barry Bro, actually, who when we were having a congratulatory picnic for some of us who had been very involved in organizing the first gala or first Pride Weeks, and he brought up the fact from the perspective of Dignity, the Catholic organization, that the IRPA was coming up for amendment and perhaps we should get involved. And so once again, not knowing any better, we said, oh, sure. And started what was countless hours of meetings, plannings, trainings, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I remember, and I don't know who it was, but the first sort of foray we made into approaching the Human Rights Commission and about the IRPA, and they said no. And I remember how mad we were and how surprised I was, because it seemed like a perfectly reasonable, simple thing to do, and they said no. And I was quite surprised. I thought, well, they're not very polite, are they?
But Liz, I know if we were having that case today, I would be very surprised. But this is 1980s Alberta, and so why
82, 83?
Yeah. Well, I came here in 83, so it would have been 84 maybe. But well, I think it's and I've spoken before about my sense of, well, you shouldn't be mean and nasty to people. And if people are saying this means, you're being mean and nasty to us, why wouldn't you change it? And so little did I know, thankfully, what we were up against. And And so, but I do remember that. I thought, well, that's really rude, was my thought. And I remember we were meeting at your house that night, Michael, and we were all some were not quite as surprised as some of us, but it was like, well, now. So I guess we have a whole lot more work we got to get doing.
Right. And so I think that at that point, then we started, I think initially the Human Rights Commission reported to the Department of Labor, I think it was at that time, which was Young.
Les Young.
Les Young was the minister. And I think we wrote him about we wanted to meet, and he sent that on to the commission. Instead to meet with the commission. And so we did end up having a meeting with the chair of the commission. It was a woman whose name I forget was the first chair of the commission. And not all of us, but some of us went and talked about, what we thought and wanted and et cetera, kind of thing, and the problems and issues we were having. I think, as you said, Liz, that was probably 84 or something around that time, 83, 84 kind of thing in that. And then she eventually decided that we should actually meet with the commission, the full commission, and do a presentation of issues. And that was, there were about 6 or 7 of us that were part of that. Meeting, and we remember we tried to choose. Well, first of all, we decided that we wanted to be like, look and act like and appear like average Albertans, Martha and Henry kind of thing. And also some diversity in terms of both men and women, but also in backgrounds. I mean, Liz has got the degree that she mentioned. Maureen Irwin, who was part of it, was a grandmother with grandkids, kind of thing. And that we had the fellow that was the postie, his name I kind of forget at the moment. With the union, postie union. And a number of others. I can't quite, but there were 6 or 7 of us, and the notion that we adopted, which we did a number of times later on too, is each of us spoke a little bit about ourselves personally, the kind of background we were and what we saw, to give that notion of, we're real people, we're here, we do things, we're part of Alberta, in this case Edmonton primarily, kind of thing in that, although the commission dealt with the whole province. So should I tell the funny part of that story?
Yes. Oh, yes. You have to.
So we have, this was one of our first meetings with the commission too. And so we had practiced and prepared. Oh God, when I think back at the amount of time we spent on this presentation, and that we wanted, as I said, we wanted to appear very much part of, the scene in that. So we went to the meeting and got there in advance. We planned to get there before, so we were ready. And they would, a room that we would be in, and then the commission would come in. So when I walked in the room, kind of thing, that I had with me my gold lame bag and my gold high heels that I put on with a bag. And Maureen Irwin, who was sitting next to me, who was the grandmother, just about had a fit. Michael, we're trying to be like we're everybody else, kind of, what are you doing, kind of thing. That at which point people like Liz and others started laughing. They could tell that this was a ruse on my part. I put them away into the purse and put the purse underneath, kind of thing, and that too. But Maureen loved to tell that story, and I loved to tease her about it too, because she was totally flipped out.
Maureen died several years ago, and frequently I find myself saying, now, Maureen, what would we do? What should we do here? And she was one of the world's great people. She was very down to earth, very solid, didn't mess around, got things done, kept us in line, or tried to. And if she said she was going to do something, she did it. And was very pragmatic. I remember years ago when Gala Civil Rights and Gala Pride were sort of trying to figure out what to do. because it was too much for one organization to be doing. We met. We met at somebody's cottage, and Maureen had MS, and sometimes she would get really tired. And I remember her saying, "I'm really tired." So she went and she lay down on the floor. And so from the floor, this voice came that said, "Well, we just need to focus on civil rights with Gala, and somebody else needs to do the pride work." And that was sort of the end of the discussion after, much heavy duty debate. And it's like, oh, okay. But I remember that there she was down on the floor, and it was just so obvious that it solved our problem. And so that's where the division between the pride work and the civil rights work started to happen.
How did a person like Maureen become involved with this movement itself? You mentioned that she was a grandmother. She was suffering from MS. How did she become involved?
I think and though she was a little bit older than some of us, and she was able to use that grandmother instinct, believe me, very well. That too. And I think she was also involved with the women's movement. In the city. And I think when that kind of there were some divisions that occurred about the women's movement and lesbians, and whether lesbians were welcome or not. There was a lot of public thing, they really trying to divide the community, trying to divide the women's community and say negative things, blah blah blah. Lesbians weren't real women, and all kinds of nasty stuff. And so I think that she and some other women kind of then started to look at and do some work outside of the women's movement. And I think that's how she kind of came into Gate and some of us and the rest that were doing things in that particular area. And then as with any of us and all of us, I suppose, once you started a little bit, you got to know folks and other people, you got to know, and et cetera, and it really, as Liz said, I think the other thing that she was someone that did things, and if phone calls needed to be made, she made that. If there was stuff that had to be delivered, she did that. If there was stuff that we had printed, she did that. She was not afraid to do anything. That and that as well. And so we probably took advantage of her a bit.
Yeah, probably. But I do remember at one point, somehow, or rather, she got into doing some public education stuff with some of the United Churches.
Right.
And I remember she would talk about her United Church dress, which was the only one she still had.
Yes.
And the only time she wore it was when she went to a United Church to speak. And there were lots. We'd have other meetings or other things, and I remember little discussions with her about should she wear her United Church dress, and the answer was almost always no. But
yes,
and she could relate to anybody.
She
really could. And I think that she had the kind of energy that just helped people feel safe enough to do whatever they needed to do. Like, I don't recall anybody, politicians or but anybody really directing anything really nasty towards her.
Yeah.
Because it would have been their life if we'd found out about it, because it wouldn't have been on. But I don't recall her stirring up any kind of real animosity with folks. I still miss her and think about her frequently.
Yeah.
So
Maureen died in, I think, about 1995 or 6.
Yeah.
Somewhere in there that I can't exactly recall. But Maureen also liked to have a good time. I mean, she was also fun, humorous. I'll tell one of the other stories that during Pride events, and this probably was about 1985, 86, and this was not a parade. This was in the early years. We had a week or 10 days and had different events. And one of the events was at the Orlando bookstore on White Avenue, which was a women's co-op. store, that Maureen had been involved and went off, and I went there. They had a lot of books that and that many of us went to buy, but they were having an evening of women's poetry, literature, etc. as part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And Maureen said to me, she initiated this. People don't realize it. She said to me, she said, that'll be pretty serious stuff kind of thing, and that we need to do something. So she and I decided that we would go, and she would be, I would be Alice, Alice. Yeah. And she would be,
what was her lover's name?
Yeah. As a rose is a rose is a rose.
Yeah.
Alice B. Toklas and heavens, Liz, you and I are getting old with our memory.
I know.
Who was a writer and wrote poetry, etc., and that stuff. And Alice Toklas was her partner. And did not write and housekeeper and did a lot of things like that. So I went as Alice and she went as the other woman who would have been considered in her day a fairly manly woman, wore a hat that men would wear and dressed like a man, pants and this vest and that kind of thing, and that too.
Well, for heaven's sakes. Gertrude Stein.
Yeah, Gertrude Stein. Oh my God, how could we forget Gertrude Stein? Yes, and so she dressed like Gertrude Stein, and she took along a couple of little things to read, including one of her most famous lines is "A rose is a rose is a rose" kind of thing, and that. But it was a little bit longer. The only thing Alice wrote was a cookbook, the Alice B. Toklas cookbook.
Yeah.
And which had and was infamous because it had a couple of recipes for marijuana brownies in it, kind of thing. That was at the time it was written. This was written in the 40s. Kind of was considered. Anyway, was quite anyway. So I went and Alice was a petite little woman by comparison to Gertrude, and Alice tended to dress a little bit more in feminine clothes, not really high feminine, but feminine. So I went in one of my yellow dresses and hat and shoes that matched, and my gold purse kind of thing, and that. And she read as Gertrude first, and then I read from Alice's cookbook. I read the section that is about Picasso coming to lunch. And Picasso came to lunch. Whenever Picasso came to lunch, he wanted a dish that was made with the fish. And Alice hated it because it meant she had to go out to the market and buy the fish and bring it back so that he would be happy. So I'm reading her recipe for the fish that she's cooking. I opened the purse and pull out a fish that I bought at the market and hung it. The audience was dead silent. They were like, "Oh my God!" I put it back in the purse and finished what I was doing. And she and I had arranged for a taxi to come and take us. We both went out and we roared with laughter. We just howled kind of thing, that because this was not the kind of thing that others were doing, that reading kind of thing. And we came back to my place and had something to drink and laughed for the next hour or so kind of thing. That so that was, and she loved doing it. I mean, she instigated that. People think I did not instigate it. She instigated that kind of thing. And it was on the basis, she said, "Oh, there'll be all this high food and literature and stuff and that, so we got to do something different." So anyway, she liked to do things like that. She and I often did little things like that.
And an excuse for you to bring out your yellow gold purse and high heels.
Absolutely, it was. My golden made purse, whenever I could. I still have it.
But to me, that also sort of symbolizes one of the things I've talked about and still will go on about, is that we had fun. And we could do outrageous and silly things and did them at the drop of a penny because it kept us going. We were doing very hard, very serious, laborious work. And had a sense that there were big stakes involved, and so, but we always laughed. And I think that's personally, I think that's something that's missing these days, is that the sense that you can be doing something really, really important, really serious, and you can still love and respect each other and laugh and have a good time. I think that, I know that's one of the things that carried us forward.
Oh, yeah.
There's a natural follow-up question from Liz's previous episode. And in that episode, Liz mentioned how both of you would have discussions and you have different lenses on how to approach a situation. Yet at the end of the day, and here today, you're friends, you love each other, you didn't destroy. But can you talk a little bit about how you viewed situations differently and your approaches to human rights commissions and how to solve a problem?
Well, that could take a while. yeah. But, you know, I mean, I think the one example was, you know, I was on the first, you asked me to be on the first board of the AIDS Network. And we had some real disagreements because I thought that the focus should be on education and that we should be doing a whole lot of networking and education. And that wasn't the desire of the others. And so I didn't continue, and also because the work with Gala was continuing, and there were very good folks at the network. And so I didn't feel that if I withdrew, it would be all that damaging. And I'm not being egotistical about that, it's just a fact. But I do know how touched I was, Michael, when you know, you put forward the notion that that because of my commission, you know, persistence about the notion of networking, that it be called the AIDS Network. And I still appreciate that, because by golly, we went at that one hammer and tongs.
Yeah. I think that was, your suggestion, wasn't it, to name it a network? Which we did adopt. And we kind of lived that fairly well too. I mean, not perfectly like any of that too. But the other, just as you were mentioning, I do remember in some of those early discussions like that. And because there were a number of, there were 5 or 6 or whatever of us, and most number of men, and that at one point that you turned and said, "Oh, you men, all you think about is your penises." We get on to some other conversation kind of thing in that too, and there was some truth to what she had to say.
We always bring 2 heads to every conversation.
Exactly. And certainly at times with Gala, there was certainly I remember during some of the planning for Pride and some of there was some pretty heated discussions about drag and about women's roles and Lorna Murray and I, you know, sort of took that on. And when Maureen was still there, she would join. But it was, you know, we didn't pull very many punches, and but we all survived. You know, I still have the letter from the guy who was the postie, who I can see him, but I can't.
So can I.
And he wrote a letter to Gala telling us that would actually be would stand well these days, saying that, you know, we were white, upper middle class civil servants with lots of privilege, and what about the rest of the world? And I mean, that's sort of in essence, and that he was going to go and put his energy into union work, you know, and that, you know, that was, I think we all knew that there was some truth to it, because most of us were civil servants of one sort or another. We were educated and had good solid incomes, and we knew that made a difference. But you know, again, it was, this is how it is, and we're not going to take it personally. If you want to go away, that's fine. We'll miss you, but keep in touch.
Yeah. And I think that partly because you, Doug, you asked about you know, how we managed. I think we both. My opinion is that both Liz and I and others, but respected each other and their opinions and drive. And when we did come to some conclusion and move on, that everyone joined in and did the work, kind of thing. That there wasn't any any reluctance to do that. And people took on what they could in terms of time and their capability, which was expected. Yeah, we could certainly disagree on stuff and we could have fun, but we also worked and did the work and got things done.
Yeah.
Everybody joined in, and I think that is part of building a friendship then as well, kind of thing in that too.
Yeah, and we did lots of social stuff together. I mean, the folks we were doing community work with really became a friend circle. And we spent lots of social time together. I remember at one point I was with Catherine, and we were very active in the lesbian community, but we kept hearing, there aren't any lesbians in town. And I'm thinking, well, we know a whole lot of them. And so Catherine and I had a barbecue at our place and invited, there must have been 50 or 60 women. And many of whom were surprised that there were all these women. And actually that's where Maureen met her partner, Cheryl. So it was important to be complete people with each other, to be able to talk about our broken hearts or our dissipate, our heart, whatever was going on in our lives. So that we weren't just activists, we were whole people. And I think that makes a difference as well.
There's going to be a few people who will only be listening to this episode, and they may be in the know, so they know of some of the people. They may not have listened to your previous episode, Liz, but can you briefly just mention a little bit more about who Catherine is and the role she had in your life?
Yeah, well, Catherine DeBray, and she and I were lovers for 3 years. And but one of the things that happened with Catherine was that she, through me, became very involved in women's space. And she was a very competent person and very organized, and was part of what the polarization was that eventually got me expelled from women's space, and Catherine sort of kicked off the executive. And the criticism of her was that she was, she was criticized for organizing the first women's dance, or the first dance at the Saxony Hotel on New Year's Eve years ago. And she did it very quickly and very efficiently, and she was criticized for doing it too well and too efficiently. But we were involved at that point with LEAF, the Legal Education and Advocacy Fund for women lawyers in the country. And they had a day a week or a day a year to go into the House of Commons and speak to the ministers. And so Catherine was sent as Women's Space's delegate. And poor old John Crosby, he was the minister of whatever it was, labor, whatever it was at the time. And Catherine stood up in the House and asked him, I mean, this was the 80s, when they were going to include sexual orientation in the Human Rights Code of Canada or in the Charter. Poor man just about lost his false teeth. And because there was no prep for that. And so she got well and truly lambasted for doing that when she came back, because the organization was pretty closeted. There were a lot of very closeted people involved, and they were madder to hatter because now people would figure out that Women's Space was a lesbian organization. But that's where our friendship with Sven Robinson began, because Sven was in the House at the time and came across the floor to talk to her, and became friends after that. Yeah. So, she just stood up. And again, it was that part of, well, this is a question that I have, so I'm just going to ask you. Yeah. And it would have been great to be a fly on the wall.
I knew Catherine well too, of course, because of Liz and Catherine knew them well, and with some of those barbecues. Plus, we did the New Year's levy at your place as well. Yeah, that was maybe a little later.
Yeah. And I went that picture last night, Michael, but I didn't find. I found, of course, you get distracted by all the other ones. But there's a wonderful picture of Michael with his with his outfit on, coming down. We had a long flight of stairs from upstairs, and Michael coming down and dancing down, and we had that New Year's Day party, and it was great fun. Again, the theme of we work hard, but we also, we have lots of fun.
We decided that we needed to have a New Year's Day levy.
Yeah,
that we would do it this way for ourselves, and that. So we did.
Yeah.
And it was a bit different than what you would have seen at the legislative or at the
it was
in the legislative ground. But much more fun.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And I think we had some wine, as I recall.
As I recall, and of course nowadays, if we were to do it, we could get John McDougall to come in his officer's uniform, if he would. And make us all behave and do a proper levy, and then we could have fun. But,
And John just receiving another stripe from the military just this last go around, as well as with his husband Dave Gilbert.
Those of us in the know about those stripes say that what they really mean, they're basically awarded for good behavior. And so what that means is you didn't get caught. Whatever hijinks you were up to.
Excellent. So that works perfect. Michael, we know about your hijinks where you got caught. Can you tell us about Liz and some of the hijinks where she didn't get caught, but she should have?
I mean, I know those as well. That you did that because we did a lot of things as mentioned together. And we did a lot of social stuff in that, but I think that there's any hijinks that I can remember that Liz was particularly involved in. The stuff that I was too, but not that I don't know.
I think the best one, Michael, is when it was the first Pride Week, and we had the posters made, and I think Ray Lingwanti was the printer. And John Doyle went to pick them up, and he accepted them, and they were full of typos. And so poor Ray had a visit from Lorna Murray and I, poor man, insisting that he redo the posters. And so he did. And so we took the top of the posters, which had the gala symbol on it, and cut the information part off. And the nylons were performing at the Jube.
Oh, right.
And we got mad because we'd asked them to come and perform. And they said they would only come and perform for us if we could guarantee that only gays and lesbians were in the audience. And we couldn't figure out how to do that. But we were indignant. So off we went to the Jube, and we were putting these gala posters under people's windshield wipers as the concert was going on. And we had great fun. And then one of the security people came along, saw what we were doing, reached out, grabbed one of these things, and I'll never forget her. She said, "Gays and lesbians." And so we took off. But that was one of my sort of favorite hijinks stories, where we were pushing the envelope. My goodness, it was fun.
Yes.
Yeah, and the Ray Lingwanti story goes further, because we are a small community, and I bet somebody, maybe at your house, Michael, who'd been in Toronto, he'd been in a bar in Toronto, he was talking to Ray, and Ray was talking about these two lesbians in Edmonton who had insisted that he'd redo the poster for free, and how tough they were. And he named us. And of course, this poor guy looks at me and says, "You're Liz. You're one of the two." And I said, "Yeah, that was us." That was us.
Yes, Ray would. Yes. Yes, I'd forgotten. I do remember about the posters, and that they had on misspellings. I wasn't involved with putting anything on.
No.
It
was. I think Lorna was there, and Bill Lee was there, and I was there, and I think Jeff and John were there. Oh, we had fun.
Yeah, probably so.
Yeah.
I wasn't.
Yeah.
Do either of you remember the first time you met each other?
I don't think I can exactly remember that either.
No.
I think we must have been both at some event at the same time. So it's one of these groups or whatever.
Yeah, I think it must have been.
If you came in 84, I was
no,
already.
I came in. I moved to Alberta in 83.
In 83, yeah, and I'd been here since 81. So it must have been something you came to then that I was also at, and we talked.
But you were away at school and came back, and I think you came back in 84.
Okay. Yeah, that's right.
And I think we met we met at a gala meeting probably.
Right. Because
I remember discussions about Michael's not back yet, and I wondered who Michael was. Yeah.
So that would have been because I went. I took a year in September '83 to July of '80 or June of '84. I was out of, I went to San Francisco State University for a year for a master's degree, and then came back. Yeah. Okay. So I'm sure that's what it was at one of the meetings that I was back. Yeah. And well, one of the first ones I had was with HIV, because that was brand new too. You were at that, so that, and maybe it was even at that we met, or the evening. No, I had a part of the evening before, where I had the roast pigs. Were you here for the piglets I roasted?
Yes. Yeah, and then we called a meeting at your house.
Yes.
And basically the decision was, well, AIDS is or HIV is killing us. We got to do something. Right. And so off once again we went.
And it was after that, yeah. And that was I'd made some stuffed little piggies with apples in their mouth.
Yeah.
And had a party with folks that came over, and then we actually walked down to watch the fireworks. I think then as well.
It was July the 1st.
Yeah. And that was, and had been back for like a week or something like that from California. And you talked a lot about I did.
The experiences you'd had in San Francisco.
Right.
And that it was here and it was coming here, and we needed to get prepared.
Yeah.
And for a flash last night, I had that woman's name in my head, but it's gone again. The woman who we hired to or who came to help, and who did so much good work around grief and loss and stuff, and helped us select staff.
Oh yeah.
I had it for a flash last night, so it'll come back.
Yeah.
She was very good.
Yeah. Talking about HIV Edmonton, the AIDS network named at that time. It'd be remiss of me if I didn't ask you both to discuss the first man diagnosed with HIV and AIDS in Edmonton, and his story and what did bring everybody together at that time.
Yeah, that was Ross Armstrong. At our very first meeting with the group, and someone had been identified. This was through the media. Someone identified in that. I didn't have any idea. It was one of the other fellows who was at our meeting said, I know who it is, and that, and indicated that it was Ross Armstrong, who I didn't know well, because Ross was more involved with the sports community than with any of the other groups in that. And hard to believe, but I wasn't involved with the sports groups where he was, and he was also very nice, a very good looking fellow. He was a swimmer.
Right.
Yeah. And he came from Ontario out here, and he was quite young when he came, 18 or 19. He'd been here a few years at that point. And he'd actually been involved with the Canadian Junior Olympics swim team. A bit. Yeah. And then here, he went to either the first or second gay games that were in San Francisco. Part of the swim group there as well, and won some medal at that as well. And so in this, and the group, what I would call his closest friends, were people involved in sports. They were, and I'm talking about gay men, primarily, and who knew him well. And I knew him slightly because at that same time, probably in 92 or something around that time. The sports groups I had not amalgamated, but they had a kind of they had an association. And they also published a newspaper for a couple of years, and they also had an awards evening. And he got an award for swimming in sports and that, and I got an award for community involvement or something. I can't remember exactly what kind of thing that. So I think that's when I really knew who he was, because of that evening. And then after he was identified with AIDS and was in the hospital, the first event that we did to raise some money was Alice in Wonderland with Alice in Victoria Park. And we had all the Alice. I was the Queen of Hearts, of course, and all the other characters, that were there. And he came as Alice in drag, kind of thing, tough drag. And that was the first time that he'd been out of the hospital at that point for, I think, a couple of weeks, and he came to that event, and we chatted, and then got involved, not with the organization, but not with meetings and that, but when it came to talking to the media, getting things done about HIV/AIDS, the medical people and the rest, he was always willing to do that, and did that. He and I went to Calgary to talk to some folks there about getting together. He and I went to the first national meeting of persons of community and persons with AIDS in Montreal, and that and became, and then with the network, quite active. He and I did a lot of things together, actually, socially as well. And then and his health was up and down, and in and out of the hospital at times. And then about a year later, a little bit less than that, he decided to go back to Ontario. He grew up near, not in Ottawa, but relatively close. And his sister, who lived here, was who he was living with, and she decided to go back as well. She had a son, a baby son, and that he actually babysat for a while. She worked, and after this he came down with AIDS, and went back there. And so he spent his last year of life there. We kept in touch through the phone, and then one of our members of our group went out there to help her with him in the last few weeks, because he deteriorated, bad. And then he died exactly 2 years after the diagnosis. He died on July 1st.
Oh, wow. I'd forgotten that.
Oh, it was terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it was in Ottawa, or in Ontario, and that he died. And I got there.
It was quite common for many of the men to return back to their homes, to their families during that time. And especially at the very end, it's a very common story of that.
It was in that. I don't know, we maybe want to mention then that one of the other people with us was the first person that actually we hired. The AIDS Network was Tom Gale, and we had money through a summer program. And his partner Randy was part of our group on HIV, but he also had AIDS. And Liz knows that story better than I do.
Randy, I was working in child welfare at the time as a supervisor, and Randy actually ended up in my team, and he was just loved. He was a lovely man. And I remember we were up to our eyeballs in gala stuff, and I remember walking into a team meeting and to start it, and Randy and a couple of the women were talking about the best dish detergent to use. And it was as if, there was just no difference. They were, this was something to be talking about, whether you should use this kind or that kind. And then I think they went on to laundry detergent. And there was just no sense that because he was gay, this was weird or whatever. It was just a conversation. And that's a lovely moment that I remembered. But he became ill, and And people were really, sort of, oh my God, Randy's sick. How can we help? And Randy was a very, I think, sort of proper kind of guy. And he led us down a merry path while he was ill. Because one of the things that happened was that he became, maybe a bit demented, but certainly very cognitively odd. And Tom was working at the network, and Randy basically it wasn't safe to leave him alone, not because he would hurt things, but he was very forgetful, and he ran up their phone bill horrendously and had, very little recollection of making all these long distance phone calls. So myself and some of the team and some others formed a care team for him. And we had case conferences at the hospital, and worked around schedules so that we could basically, have somebody with him most of the time.
Including you.
And yeah. I spent a lot of time, and so did Anna. When but one of the great moments of that journey was they had the cat, that Assiniboine cat that had no hair.
Yes. Oh my God.
Ugly as sin, but they loved it.
Oh, it was ugly.
But Randy decided, they lived just off of White Avenue, and the office that Randy and I worked in at that point was on White Avenue. And so I looked up one day, and there was Randy. And sometimes he would come to my office, and at that point he was going through a lot of anger, and he was really angry at men. But he would come and sit in my office, and I would just tell him many a time, I said, Randy, just sit there, be here. People will come visit. I've got work to do. And so he would. Well, then one day, it was funny. He walked in and he said, I left the cat on the bus. And I said, you what? And he said, yes, I decided to bring the cat for a visit, but he got away from me on the bus, and I don't know what to do. And so I had no idea what you do about lost cats on the bus. So I phoned the lost and found at the city bus people. And I'll never forget it. This woman said to me, that's not possible. Cats are not allowed on the bus. And I'm getting a bit teary as I remember. And I said to her, well, it may not be possible, but however, it's true. And so she got a hold of the bus driver and came back on the line and said, such and such a bus will be at such and such a space in 20 minutes. Get somebody there to get the cat. As it turned out, the bus was going to be downtown. And so I phoned Tom, who was in some sort of a meeting, and said, get your butt out of there and go get the cat.
Yes.
And so he did. And Randy went home and got the cat, or went home, and then Tom took the cat home. But one of the things about Randy and about some of these diseases is they come and go. And just before Randy died, his head cleared. And it was like just a few days before he passed. And Anna was my future partner, but we were just getting together then. And she was his palliative home. She was a palliative home care nurse, and she did a lot of his care. And so that night, Randy had a bad, he had lots of phlegm. And so he announced that he wanted some brandy. So I phoned George Davison at home and said, go get some brandy and bring it here, please. And so he did. And Randy had some brandy, or maybe it was something else that he remembered they had. But we sat and had a little drink, and he was as clear as a bell. And off he went to bed. And then the next morning, he was quite confused. And I remember Tom standing in the doorway, saying, it's okay, Randy. you can go now. And he left because he figured that as long as he was in the apartment, Randy wouldn't die. And he did. He left very soon after that. And it sounds hokey, but as he took his last breath, this rainbow came over the room. And there was another woman there who was quite close to them as well, and Anna, and they came to get his body, and it was in the days when they came in biohazard suits. Yeah. And we just looked at them and said, "Be gentle." And so, that was quite the experience. And an important part of it was that there were all these people around who knew that he and Tom were lovers, who knew that I was a lesbian, and it, the important thing was to look after Randy.
Yeah.
And I think that was really in a way a gift that he gave us. That there was. I mean, it was an awful time for in all of the media stuff about AIDS and I'm sure you remember, Michael, when in the ledge, some Tories stood up and said that they should put us all in concentration camps.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it was a horrible time.
Yeah.
And but yeah, that's Randy. And yeah.
So, and I knew this. I debated whether I'd ask you to talk about it because I knew this was going to be hard because Liz is downplaying her role, and that Liz was there all the time, and it exemplifies some of the best things that came out of the community during that time.
Yeah.
Other men and women like Liz who were caring for people who had AIDS, and they all died.
Yeah, they all died.
Somebody was going to die.
Yeah.
No one lived, kind of thing. And that, and yet people like Liz took that on, with in this case with Randy, who we all knew well, or many of us knew very well, kind of thing. And that too. And I know that was a terribly tough to watch, and I think it was terribly tough for everyone to watch because the person you were helping, they got worse. No one recovered. They all died.
Yeah, and you too, Michael, spent hours with people, hours with people, and
some very tough times in that too.
It was and I guess we just had to cling on to one another and do what we needed to do because there were no choices, there was no care, there was nothing,
No, we did that.
Yeah,
and as I say, many of the people who were volunteering and doing that were people that were the same age as the people that were dying, and most of us had no. It was the last thing in our minds that was death. When you're late 20s, early 30s, that isn't where your head is at, kind of thing. That too. We were blessed that there were so many women like Liz and others that took part and somehow had some knowledge, their ability or skills or whatever of being able to attend to and social. And I think many of us men learned some of that from, not many, and we all learned some of that from the many women who seemed to kind of know that, you just got to get in there and do it, kind of thing, and that or whatever, and that too. So I think it made many, both men and women of that time, much more empathetic people, much more understanding, and sensitive to one another and what was going on.
Yeah, and that happened everywhere. I mean, that phenomena of the women sort of coming forward and saying, well, this is what we need to do, and we're just going to go ahead and do it.
Yeah.
And
it was huge.
And it was huge, and the need was strong, and it was urgent.
Yeah.
And I remember, the same sort of thing when Tom Edge was sick. And I remember him coming to a gala meeting and just coming in and saying, I want to tell you guys personally, but I've been diagnosed with AIDS, and he said that they figured out it was AIDS because he got some sort of infection.
Yeah.
That is usually only found in rabbits.
Yeah.
And so that's when they figured out that his immune system was shot. He had that woman who was his business partner, and people rallied around. But I remember, I think you were there the night that he died.
Yeah.
And, and just being with him and saying, it's okay, Tom, you can go now.
Yeah.
And just, you just got to do what you got to do, I guess. And I mean, I wouldn't trade it for the world. I wish they hadn't died, but I do know that the AIDS stigma was very firmly attached to some of us.
Oh yeah.
And that people were nervous around us and all of that sort of shunning stuff.
And another time, maybe when we talk on that, to talk a bit more about that whole stigma. I have a lot to say about that.
And let's because there's going to be plenty of conversations, that's for sure. For our listeners, and on behalf of the listeners, I just want to say thank you. And the words thank you are not strong enough, because it was both of yours as well as others, your actions, your empathy, your care, not being quiet, that has helped us overcome so much. And it's on and it's on the shoulders of the people who are no longer with us, that we've gotten to a place where we are better, and it's not as scary as it was before. The stigma is always there, but thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
A question that goes with this, and of course this could be more emotions here as well. We've talked about Maureen, we've talked about Ross, we've talked about Randy and others. What would you say to them today if they just magically appeared? What would you say to them as far as where you have all been in this journey that your advocacy has led? What would you be able to say to them?
Well, I'd be welcoming Maureen for sure, laughing.
Yeah.
And she would be yelling at me about how stupid I am and all the dumb things I've done.
Yeah.
How are you doing now? Kind of thing that. And we would reminisce about some of those times and some of the people. I would be saying, yeah, but you did all that. And she'd say, oh, it wasn't anything. I didn't do much, kind of thing, that, which of course was not true. She did do a lot. And then I'd remind her that some of what we're talking about today is what we hoped would be happening, that the things would have changed. And she would be pleased to know that had happened.
Yeah. And I would say to her, Maureen, you've been dead long enough. It's bloody well time you came back.
Yes.
And we've got work to do still. Yeah. And I would tell her what an important difference she made in my life, and that I often think of her, and would be so glad to have her again. Yeah.
Amen.
Whew, this is real, eh?
It is. It's very real. And why I mentioned at the beginning how honored I am that you both are here on this episode of Tales of the LGBTQ plus is the stories, and it's the memories, and it's remembering where we've been and where we are today, where we're going tomorrow. That's important. These are real lives. These are real feelings and emotions. We've been talking about your advocacy and with a lot of the different groups, and we haven't touched upon every single group. You know, and that just means more conversations in the future, which is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. What do we need to know when it comes to the 80s, the 1980s, going into the 1990s? Where are we at when it comes to equal rights, when it comes to being recognized as lesbian, gay, and worksite? Where are we at this time in our conversation and in this story?
Well, I would say in short form, I mean, that's another whole conversation. But by the time we got to the end of the 80s and into, roughly the 90 or early 90s, that the period of AIDS started to change in terms of treatment, et cetera. But there were gains made about gays and lesbians during that period. There was then the case of Delwyn Green in the Supreme Court, which was another big leap forward. And then I think there was the beginnings of some changes at a broad political level, where you had different men and women who were gay and lesbian that were elected to different jurisdictions, including at the national level. And you had some things developing at the around the Charter of Rights that were significant in what was happening across the country, but here as well. And you had certainly the growth, huge growth of Pride, PRIDE, in terms of events, parades, a whole slew of things like that across the country, including here, of course, in Edmonton, which really blossomed as we got into the 90s more, the kind of thing.
Yeah.
Too, were very much. So I would say that's kind of there were obstacles and there were challenges. Alberta at times has not had a government that was very easy to work with, kind of thing.
You're being polite, Michael.
Liz talked about Ralph Klein and some of his.
Don't get me started.
Yeah, that'll take a month.
We'll get you started in another episode when it comes to
another episode. Be just fine.
But I think that one of the things, though, that I see that people now have no clue about is that people were fired from jobs simply for being gay.
Oh yeah. The document.
I think it's Rob Wells who talks about.
Oh my God.
He went up north as a teacher to take over from the last guy who went to jail for being a homosexual.
Yeah.
In Canada. And so this guy got jailed, and Rob went up and took his job years ago. I had threats against my job. If you tried to, do financial stuff at the bank, it wasn't on. They're just story after story that we knew about. And so the changes were coming, but they were all based on real lived experience of real people. And that's what we always tried to convey.
Yeah.
Let me do a plug here. Murray Billett was just recently finished and has been released a podcast episode with Edmonton City as a Museum Project, ECAM, talking about the Delwyn Green case. And definitely invite everyone to take a listen to that in-depth story, because it is so important. 1998 is when it came down, saying that we would not be able to be discriminated against at the work site. Of course, it takes many years later for those actions to go into effect still. And still, it's only recent when it comes to our transgender family receiving those types of rights as well.
Yeah. And one of the things that I noticed the other day when I was looking at some pictures of the press conference we had after the Green thing is, it's very odd, but there was no gray hair there. Not one of us had a gray hair. And it's like, I remember my hair being that color a while ago.
Yeah.
And so it seems like yesterday, but it was quite a while ago. It's hard to believe. But today, I mean, the younger people coming up, they have no clue. And that's, I think, true of any sort of social change movement. But I just think it's great that we're able to tell these stories and get them down, because history is so important. It has so much to teach us. And it's wonderful to be able to share that.
Yeah.
I make mention of this. Led Zeppelin released 50 years ago one of their greatest albums. And the conversations that we've been having today are about events that have taken since that release of that album. And still people will go listen to Stairway to Heaven, Whole Lot of Love, and be like, oh, that's just like yesterday. Well, what we're talking about today was just yesterday as well, because you get to a certain age and boom, it's fast.
Yeah.
So Liz, Michael, I want to thank you both for sharing yourselves with all of us as we navigate this conversation. And we're going to come back together and we're going to talk about more. But again, thank you. Thank you for everything that you've done. And we stand on the shoulders of giants like yourselves, and we continue to do the work that needs to be done. And again, the word thank you can't go long enough. And just thank you.
And thank you for doing this. And thank you, Liz.
Yeah. Thank you so much for doing this. And Michael and I have always got things to talk about, so I'm sure we'd be happy to come back again.
Let's do it. It's the first episode of a million, and I'm here for every single one of them.
Okay.
Thanks.
Super.
Well,
on behalf of Liz and Michael, I want to say thank you to all of you for listening to this episode today. Again, you've been listening to Tales of the LGBTQ+. Please press subscribe. Please leave ratings, comments, conversations. Reach out. This is open for everyone to have that conversation and to be part of. Tales of the LGBTQ+, yes, it's run by myself, but it's run by you as well. So please be in contact. Until next time, everyone, my name is Douglas Parsons, reminding you to be good and always text when you get home.
Okay.
Until next time, everyone.
Bye-bye.